wrapping up our meetings for the HPAC. So it's been a great year so far. We got a pretty full agenda today. I think we'll just start with, we'll welcome everybody. We're getting to the holiday season as well. So everyone's schedules, I'm sure, is getting very tight. So I'm really glad that we were able to plow through all this work really succinctly over the last few months to make the workload a little bit more spread out anyway. I defer to Damien, my co-chair, if he has any welcoming remarks or anything.
Nothing too specific, but just thanking everybody for all the time and effort, especially in the work group space, and on behalf of the staff that support the work group to get us here. You don't know how much hand wringing we did, and the co-chair meetings about like, oh man, is it going to be a giant glut at the end of the year? Are we going to have to schedule 8 December meetings and all that stuff? But it looks like as a committee, we've gotten our arms around this body of work and should be able to wrap up without a really big push right at the end. So I really want to appreciate all the work that everyone's done to do that. A lot of time, a lot of discussions. So thank you. And on that, let's get on with it.
Great. So it looks like we have no first readings. So we've gotten through that round. So we just have second readings and third readings today. I'll turn it over to Matt for any updates or recommendations and about the HPAC recommendation review process.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tuvey. So for HPAC members and members of the public, I think everybody is pretty familiar by now, but just in case we've got some new folks watching, Housing Production Advisory Council has a mandate under the executive order to deliver a set of recommendations to the governor on state actions that could increase housing production. Those recommendations are due by the end of the year. The council has broken up into 5 work groups to talk through various issues and barriers to housing production. Those work groups bring recommendations to the council for consideration. The council has 3 readings on each recommendation: a first reading to introduce the recommendation, a second reading to receive public comment, and then a third reading for a discussion and a vote. At this point, I believe at least 4, but potentially all of the work groups have completed with their first readings, their new recommendations. And so for today's meeting, there are only second and third readings. And that is the update on my end.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. Well, thank you for that, Matt. And I guess unless there's any questions from anybody on the council, we'll get jump right into the second reading. Seeing none, I guess we'll get started.
Great. Well, so the first item up for second readings for public comment will be the 5-foot wetland buffer recommendation. We have had a couple of people sign up to testify, but if you did not sign up in advance, please go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to provide public comment. The first person that we have signed up is Victoria Frankeny. Victoria, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Awesome. Good afternoon, Council. My name is Victoria Frankeny, and I oversee the advocacy program for Tualatin River Keepers. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, we are a nonprofit focused on protection and restoration of the Tualatin River watershed. Much of my role as riverkeeper and staff attorney is to provide public comment on permits that may be incomplete or lack sufficient protections for the river, its tributaries, or wetlands. Washington County encompasses the majority of our watershed, and as many may be familiar, Washington County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state. I personally have sat on committees with several cities hoping to develop their newly incorporated urban lands efficiently. The recommendation that development buffers from state wetlands be reduced by 90% is an outrageous proposal and goes directly against the state's climate and community resiliency goals. By reducing the buffer to 5 feet, the amount of sediment that enters our waters from development would increase drastically, not to mention would alter the hydrology and topography of nearby wetlands, thereby changing once pristine wetlands to what the development work group alludes to as low quality. Regardless of their state, wetlands still provide carbon sequestration, cooling, and flood and erosion management that is necessary for communities to survive in this climate crisis. If the buffer were reduced, the likelihood of flooding of nearby development would also increase. Unmitigated, uncontrolled stormwater runoff exacerbated by increased development is a major issue in the Tualatin watershed, an issue we are just now trying to address from development that occurred over 50 years ago. Wetlands provide natural systems for addressing these concerns, but cannot properly do so without necessary setbacks from development. And failure to account for these increasing concerns will only displace the communities that the governor and this council intends to build. There have been hundreds of projects around the state and just in the Tualatin watershed to restore wetlands. Community members, cities, the state, and the federal government recognize the value in preserving and restoring these wetlands. And I like to think that the governor's affordable housing goal is about quality just as much as it is about quantity. I've submitted a more detailed written comment to the council that I ask you to consider prior to your vote. The recommendation is counterproductive to the state's climate and housing goals and should be struck down. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you very much. And the second person signed up in advance to provide testimony is Andrea D'Amico. Go ahead.
Hello.
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 Can you hear us, Andrea?
I can hear you.
Great. You signed up in advance for public testimony on the 5-foot wetland buffer recommendation. So you have 3 minutes to give testimony to the council. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council. My name is Andrea D'Amico. I'm a resident of Oregon and a concerned citizen. I have read the HPAC's workshop recommendation, and I understand the hurdles you are up against, but I am shocked that you see no downside of this recommendation. Wetlands serve a purpose: water storage and delay, flood water control, sediment retention and stabilization, erosion control, phosphorus retention, plant growth, nitrate removal, benefit the water conditions such as algae bloom, fish habitat, fish returning to spawn, plus resident fish, wildlife, amphibian, reptile habitat, water bird feeding and nesting habitats, aquatic habitat, songbird, raptor, mammal habitat, water cooling helping the climate change, reducing the effect of drought, native plant diversity, pollinator habitat. All wetlands sequester carbon from the wetlands through photosynthesis by acting as a sediment trap for runoff. By reducing the buffer zone, you would damage our wetlands and environment forever. Washington State's buffers are 200 to 300 feet, California 100 feet, Idaho 40 feet, Montana 50 feet. Does Oregon want to be the pioneer in 5 feet and ruin our beautiful green state? The wetlands to function, they need buffers. The United States Environmental Protection Agency studies show that sediment need a minimum of 40 feet, but prefer 110 feet. Nitrogen needs a minimum of 100 feet, but prefers 180. Phosphorus, minimum of 40, prefers 100. Wildlife needs a minimum of 100, but prefers 300 to 1,000. All are under the national's average for buffer zones already. Please don't degrade it further. Oregon is known for lush forests, scenic trails, natural habitat. Please preserve that and not let us be known for the home of Voodoo Donuts. The UGB still has buildable land. Before affecting our wildlife and increasing the climate change, polluting our water, and promoting flood conditions, build on the land already designated buildable and make the housing there more affordable. There are a lot of options to make homes more affordable. For example, lowering the costs of building permits and giving incentives to builders to build affordable homes. I hope you vote against this, and I want to thank you very much for your time, consideration, and commitment to the state.
Thank you, Andrea. that is the last person that signed up in advance to testify. For any others who'd like to testify, please raise your hand. Dave Robinson, you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, all. Can you hear me?
Yep, you sound great.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm new to the conversation, and I would just like for the council to consider a few things and answer questions such as, what does marginal or degraded wetlands mean? Does it mean it needs to be a non-flowing body of water, a non-river or stream? And then, if filled in to build houses, how many houses does that mean toward Governor Kotek's 36,000 new housing units in the metropolitan area? And myself specifically, I live along the Tualatin River in unincorporated Washington County. So my personal primary concern is Tualatin River, but overall, how many houses is this really going to create? And then how would structural integrity be assured for those new residents in the event of an earthquake? And finally, where would the source of the standing water be rerouted? If it is only the standing water or degraded wetlands, where would that be rerouted? And I would hope that your recommendation would include answers to these, I think, very initial questions. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next up, Lissa Martin. Lissa, you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. My name is Lissa Martin. I live in Hillsborough, and I oppose the change to a 5-foot wetland buffer. I feel like as climate disasters continue and likely increase, these buffer zones are going to be crucial in keeping people alive, not only by preserving our environment, but we would be putting them in danger by allowing them into these buffer zones that we and our environment needs. So I would recommend opposing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lissa. All right, that looks like everybody who has signed up or who has raised their hand to testify. So we will move to the next recommendation up for public comment, the LDP 120-day recommendation. We have nobody signed up in advance. If you would like to testify, please raise your hand. All right, not seeing any hands. We will move to the codes and design recommendations up for second reading. First up is annexation and comp plan 180 days recommendation. If anybody would like to provide comment, please raise your hand. Not seeing any hands, we will move to the TIA and proportionate share recommendation. Anybody interested in providing public comment, please raise your hand. Not seeing any hands, we will move to the legislation training recommendation. Anybody interested in providing public comment on the legislation training recommendation, please raise your hand. All right, next up is the stormwater recommendation. If you're interested in providing comment, please raise your hand. All right, seeing no hands, we'll move to the GC utility hookup recommendation. Raise your hand if you'd like to provide public comment on the utility hookup recommendation. All right, seeing no hands, we will move to the finance recommendations up for a second reading. First up is the Outside Transaction Council for OHCS recommendation. Please raise your hand if you'd like to provide comment. Seeing no hands, we will move to the pre-development program recommendation. Anybody interested in providing public comment on the pre-development program recommendation, raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we will move to the workforce shortages recommendations up for a second reading. Anyone interested in providing public comment on the 5-year investment recommendation, please raise your hand. Seeing none, anyone interested in providing public comment on the community college recommendation, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands, we'll move to the coordinating body recommendation. Raise your hand if you'd like to provide public comment on the coordinating body recommendation. We'll move to the employer comp recommendation. Raise your hand to provide public comment on the employer comp recommendation. Seeing none, we'll move to the HP core recommendation. Anyone interested in providing public comment on the HP core recommendation, please raise your hand. With that, that concludes the recommendations up for public comment. I will pass it back to you, Co-Chair Tubby.
Great, thank you, everybody, and thank you for the public providing that the comments as well as the ones being written in. We greatly appreciate those. We'll be moving into third readings for a series of recommendations that have come from the work groups, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to. Well, I guess we just go in for the first one for Deb Flanagan on the any kind of updates or changes to this first recommendation to expand brownfields redevelopment funding programs.
Thank you, Chair Tovey. There was a couple of feedback or public testimony in regards to the brownfields recommendation. And I'm going to go over a few items that we added to the recommendation because of those public testimony. Specifically, this was from one of our HPAC members, Daniel Bunn. Dr. Bell provided some information to us, and then also Metro. So on the first item, Matt, could you bring up the changes just so we can see the couple paragraphs? Thank you, Matt. So the first item is that we added consider expansion of DEQ consistent judgments and administrative settlement programs to focus on housing production to address third-party liability. And the second piece here was to implement a licensed site remediation professional program to supplement DEQ staff to review site plans to brownfields. And then specific to the section number 7, which is items that would be needed for implementation. We added an item in regards to ensuring that the equity lens would be taken into account. And so we asked to develop tools to measure health outcomes for individuals living in housing built on brownfield sites before and after occupancy of housing on brownfield sites. Those are the 3 additional items that we added. Dr. Bateman, would you like to add anything in addition, since you and Alyssa worked so hard on this recommendation?
Thank you, Deb. No, I was tracking along as you ticked through each of the additions, and those matched my notes. That I'm happy with those. Thank you.
And so, Chair Tovey, I think those are the changes. And so if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Great. Is there any questions for the land availability work group?
Dr. Bell.
Director Bell.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, afternoon. Well, first off, Deborah, I really appreciate just all of the work from you and Director Bateman and Elisa on this one. I said, made comments, I think, during either the first or the second reading that I particularly appreciated this proposal for a number of reasons in terms of just the collective charge of this body in terms of thinking through some very specific strategies to make take some big swings and tackle some things that we maybe have not tackled collectively in the past around production. So I really appreciate that. And I would just want to make one particular comment in that I appreciate the responsiveness in terms of centering race and equity. I know that both that has been one of the commitments that has come through from the governor, but I also know that there's a shared commitment to that. I would also say that my hope is that in the facet of that recommendation that charges sort of a multi-agency across from a state government perspective to be engaged in centering and holding us able and capable to race equity, that we can think about some very specific measurements to get there in terms of when we say centering race and equity lens. I would imagine that we're all in different places, including myself. And so just holding us capable to some very specific outcome kind of metrics and holding us accountable to that piece. And so I just appreciate your everybody's responsiveness to that particular comment.
Well, thank you for bringing it forward.
Councilmember Jenny.
I just wanted to note, we've done development on brownfield before, and I feel like I know there was concerns listed about maybe there being health disparities, especially for more lower income people, exposing lower income residents to health things that may not be good for their long-term health. And I see that inclusion in here. From my perspective, with our experience working through DEQ on brownfield cleanup programs, I don't see that being a concern because the levels that you have to clean up to are so much lower than what the what causes an acute or even a chronic is smaller health concern. So all that, I'm not saying it well, but I think this is good, and I don't think we need to be worried about that unintended consequence.
Thank you so much. Any other questions for the land availability work group team? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for tentative or preliminary approval or recommendation for this recommendation.
Chair Tuvey, I move for preliminary adoption of this recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember Madsen. Can I have a second?
I'll second that. Brenda Bateman.
Thank you, Dr. Bateman. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Yes.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. That wraps up land availability. So we'll go to the next one for land development permit applications. The first one is early feasibility acceptance. I'll turn over to Eric or anybody else on the land development permit applications team.
Yes, we haven't made any changes, so we're both moving forward with a vote on the recommendation.
Okay. Were there any questions for the land development permit applications or this recommendation from the rest of the council members? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for acceptance or preliminary acceptance.
I'll move. This is Margaret Van Vliet.
Thank you. How about a second?
Second, this is Andrea Bell.
Thank you, Director Bell. Any discussion on the motion?
I had one thing to add.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I think Gary and Eric and I had a good conversation about this one. And one thing just to point out for folks is that this is really a timing mechanism, that all of the local code standards for the decisions get applied as is. The standard doesn't change. The decision just gets made earlier. That's it.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll turn it over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuffy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. The next one under this team is the appeals expedited process. Is there any updates on that, Councilmember Olson?
No updates. Daniel, do you want to make any comments? Daniel's our sponsor.
I don't have any comments on it other than I think it's a great recommendation. and I'm prepared to make a motion in support of it.
Okay. Well, first, is there any questions on the recommendation for the team? Seeing none, I'd entertain the motion to preliminary approval.
Mr. Chairman, I move to grant preliminary approval of the expedited appeals recommendation.
I'll second it.
And Eric and Councilmember Olson seconded it, and I'll turn over to Matt, discussion on the motion. Director Bell, Director Bateman.
Thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble finding my buttons. I just wondered if we could hear a little bit more. Was LUBA brought in as an SME? Did they have any particular thoughts or contributions to this one? I should have checked with them earlier and I didn't make that call.
I had a conversation with two of the members of LUBA a couple of months ago. It didn't specifically relate to this. This is driven more from commentary coming from the development community, local jurisdictions, and some others who testified in front of us. LUBA's position is, or the takeaway that I got from talking with LUBA is that they're very proud of the fact that they are not a court. They are the embodiment of Goal 1 participation, that anyone can appear in front of LUBA and be heard, and you don't have to be an attorney. So I think this is consistent with making sure people get a good, fair hearing, keeping barriers low, but getting questions resolved in a timely fashion. So the other thing is they're very hesitant on giving an opinion on if the rules that they adjudicate are good or bad. They say, look, our job is to evaluate things that the legislature gives us. They don't really like getting into the policy discussion of, well, we think here's how you should overhaul land use policy, because they really do try to maintain neutrality. So I know that's not a perfectly satisfactory answer, but that's what I got out of talking with them.
I'd add one more piece of context. I'm not sure if you mentioned it in one of the prior readings, but this isn't really a knock on the job that LUBA does. I think Daniel and the team on the work group did a bunch of background about how frequently LUBA hears housing related appeals, and I believe it was something along the lines of 7 or 8 of them in the last year. So it's not a ton of appeals. And in pretty much all of those instances, with one exception, LUBA affirmed the decision of the local government. So, you know, it's more about the timeline and certainty, and can we allow for a check to make sure that there's not bad actors in local government that are completely overlooking and setting aside rules, but at the same time, you know, it's 6 months and $35,000 to, you know, defend one of these appeals, and do we want to tack that onto housing approvals, even if LUBA does a great job, which they often do. And so that's more the how do we get out of the time and expense portion of it, as opposed to LUBA's not doing their job correctly. And then, you know, there's another part about, there's a whole bunch of kind of ad hoc housing supportive rules that have been passed at the state level, like the clear and objective standards rules and all those type of things. And it, you know, we just had what is clear and objective argued by some very capable attorneys on either side, all the way up to the Court of Appeals, and it took a year plus, which really defeats the purpose of having clear and objective housing standards, where you can say yes or no, they've been satisfied, because it's all about trying to expedite housing. So trying to figure out ways to, you know, sort of curtail some of those sort of worst outcomes of really protracted land use appeals.
Thank you for bringing that up, Damien. Yes, this is not a knock on LUBA at all, actually. So we went back and pulled all their cases from last year. You're right, most of them were affirming local government decisions when it comes to housing, and they had a very good record when they were reviewed by the Court of Appeals on housing issues. So LUBA's doing their job great when it comes to applying the law and making sure people get heard. One of the things I took away from my conversation with the 2 board members was that as clear and objective standards have worked their way through the system, these housing related appeals are becoming more cut and dried, which is great. I mean, it's like turning an oil tanker, but we are moving in the right direction. So as cities, and honestly, what they said was, having a financial penalty to hit cities that didn't have clear and objective standards has gone a long way to bring compliance about. So as local jurisdictions, you know, mature their clear and objective standards, there's really not a lot to review unless there's just some gross error that needs to be corrected. So I think that's a good balance to say we can have a little bit shorter appeals process at LUBA that's still accessible to people, keeping in mind you always have recourse to the court system if there are major constitutional issues or major due process issues. So
thank you so much. Are there any other comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, I will turn over to Matt for the roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
I'm gonna abstain.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tubby.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much for that. The third and final under land development and permit applications is the Appeals LUBA electronic filing recommendation. Councilmember Olson, have any updates for that, or?
No updates. Again, Daniel was our sponsor of this. So Daniel, any other comments?
No updates. I did speak to the assistant chief technology officer for DAS yesterday about this, and he was very excited to have some attention drawn to this. Luba's been asking for this for years. DAS thinks it's some low-hanging fruit that would make a big improvement. So I'm ready to support this to try and flag some attention to it.
Any other questions for the committee? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary adoption of this recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I move preliminary adoption of the Luba electronic filing recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember Bunn. Any second?
I'll second. Brenda Bateman.
Thank you, Director Bateman. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tubby.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much for the land development permit applications team. We'll go on to the next work group for codes and design. The first recommendation up is single stair recommendations with BOLI. I'll turn over to Councilmember Janney or I don't know if you're working on that or
I'm
any
gonna
kind
let,
of updates or.
yeah, I'm gonna let Gary take this one. He was the author of this recommendation.
Well, actually, I'll team with Council Member Tom Cody. He worked on the stair side of the things, which really makes sense. And I was bringing forth the BOLI trigger. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the BOLI trigger on this. I think the allowing the stair to the fifth is very conducive in allowing for a lot of the nonprofit developers who can really utilize this garden style apartment to provide affordable housing. And that right now it's limited to 3, and going up to 5 will really open up a lot of potential for them. But the issue is after 4, the BOLI wage trigger really kicks in, and that really impacts a lot of the development. I've seen many developments that for smaller BIPOC CDCs that are not able to fill the budget gap because of the trigger, the cost trigger, it can go up to 10 to 15% or even higher. And, case in point, we were competing for a housing project in Wilsonville with farm worker housing. We're trying to maximize at 5 stories so we could really get more farm worker residents. However, the trigger caused like almost 20 mil of gap that we just could not figure out a way to kind of, figure out. I know in the original mentioning of this, Council Member Margaret Van Vliet asked to kind of separate this out. We just sort of ran out of time, being very honest on this one, and wanted to kind of, take this side by side so it actually affords the smaller BIPOC CDCs to really utilize this 5, single stair allowing 5 stories approach.
We heard some public testimony on this, also encouraging us to separate the two. I think the prevalent, if 2 or 3 parties testifying makes for prevalence, sentiment was that they were concerned that the BOLI kind of attachment to this may imperil the stair recommendation itself. So if we vote on this with BOLI, I propose that we do it with the amendment or the wordsmithing that one should not come at the expense of the other, but keep BOLI in the recommendation as it exists, but as I said, surgically wordsmith the recommendation so that it's clear that the single stair recommendation can move forward without it being attached to BOLI if for any reason that kills it.
I agree, Tom, and Chair Natalie, Jenny, and I just kind of discussed this as well, and we thought that if we needed to, maybe we can put some sort of condition that still highlights the issue. It's a really major issue. You can ask any nonprofit developer, So with that, yeah, if we could put a little condition that allows that, so it's not, to your point, not impairing any the one or the other. So I'm open to that.
Thank you. Any questions for the team? I see Councilmember Bunn's hand up.
Yeah, just procedurally, it sounds like we're all kind of on the same page that these could be separated, and that would make sense politically. Can we make a motion to have preliminary adoption and then direct staff or the co-chairs as they prepare the final document to do the wordsmithing to get those separated, so that by the time we come around for final adoption, that's cleaned up? Is that the appropriate way to do this?
From my opinion, I would think so, because I would think that from a functional, all of these could potentially be broken up, depending on who gets a hold of it and who wants to champion and move it forward. So I think that is, functionally a possibility, regardless of whether or not we specifically do that to this one or not. Would you agree, Damien or Matt?
I'd agree. And on the procedural step, I think, if you make a motion that says pass this, and in the final report add a note that says each of these concepts, while related, has benefit standing alone.
Yeah.
I don't think that is sort of beyond the pale of what we can do here in a third reading or anything.
Okay. Director Bateman.
I was just going to offer an alternate thinking right along these same lines, that I think we could just as easily read them as two separate today and vote on them separately today. I think that would be within bounds. So that would actually make me feel better, because I'm not exactly sure what the connective wording would be here in the next step. It would be cleaner to just go ahead and split them. I don't see a problem with that, but I just wanted to offer that as well.
To that point, would it make sense? I'm asking probably Matt. Do we need paperwork for each one of them, or can we just break
Let's
it
hear
up
from
by
Senator Jama before we totally go down this path.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, co-chairs. Just a quick question. Was there any engagement or a testimony from the firefighters by any chance?
Yes, there was, Senator Jama. There was.
Can you elaborate a little bit about their position?
They were, of course, concerned about the capacity of some of the local firefighting jurisdictions in response times. I guess it varies widely across the state. Some larger jurisdictions have big firefighting forces and respond very quickly. Some do not. So there was concern about the disparity in that, and that perhaps the local jurisdictions, it should be calibrated based on the firefighting. That was their recommendation, that it be calibrated based on the local response times and number of firefighters, et cetera.
Yeah, if I can add, there is a note in the implementation section that we specifically added in response to the state fire marshal's testimony about making sure that the local jurisdiction, the local fire department had capacity to get there to handle this. So that was specifically, so a local jurisdiction can only enact it if the local fire department believes they have the capacity for it.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
Councilmember Bunn, is your hand still up, or do you have another question?
No, that's an accident. Sorry.
No, you're good. Okay, so there seemed to be a bit of a discussion about whether we adopt this wholesale or break it up into two, or have it done administratively after final adoption of the final document. I guess I don't know if you have any opinion on that, Matt, on how best to proceed.
Sure, Co-Chair Tevi and council members. I don't have a perspective on how to proceed. That's a call for the council, but I think that the recommendation, I agree with Director Bateman. It's clean, it's discreet enough in the recommendation that the council could adopt them both with a direction to split them up after, or adopt or take them up as a vote on each individual. First the BOLI, and then, or the order doesn't matter, but one with the stair and one with single stair and one with the BOLI.
Okay.
If you in the recommendation, just for, I guess, for members of the public who haven't seen it, it is on the HPAC website. The recommendations are not intertwined significantly, so I think you can just take independent votes if you'd like.
I would entertain a motion as recommended by Director Bateman, or either, actually, and then we can have a discussion around that.
Well, let's do the separate votes, and everyone can kind of get on the record how they want to get on the record. I think
Yeah, and I move.
Okay.
Yeah.
I move approval of the single stair recommendation.
I'll second that
Okay.
one.
Cody? And Van Vliet, was that you?
Yes.
Councilmember? Okay. Seconded. Any discussion on the motion?
And just to clarify that
Any
as
motion?
separate
Yep.
from the BOLI.
Correct.
Fantastic.
Just on the single stair recommendation portion of the recommendation. So I'll turn that over to Matt for roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson. Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Yes.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. And so then we'll consider the second half of the recommendation. Would anybody care to make the recommendation on just the BOLI portion of it? Or is there any separate questions about the BOLI portion of it?
Yeah, so separately, I would like to make a motion to pass a recommendation to exempt up to 5 stories for BOLI wage trigger.
Okay. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second it. Deb Flagan.
Okay, Councilmember Flagan, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll turn it back over to Matt for another roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan. Councilmember Flagan.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yeah.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Abstain.
Director Bell.
Abstain.
Director Bateman.
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevi.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Councilmember Rockwell, do you have a question?
Yeah, I got here late, so I wanted Matthew to know that I'm here and I'm comfortable with not having voted on the last 2 ones since I didn't hear the presentation. But don't want to miss the action going forward.
Thank you, council member.
So our next, where am I? Oh, next recommendation under codes and design is density swap recommendations. Councilmember Janney, are you leading that?
Yep, we've not made any changes to the original recommendation. I know there was some discussion about this, not some from cities, that this isn't necessary because they have another process that you can go through to do it. But the whole point of this is that there's a clear and objective process to allow for the density swap. So happy to entertain any questions.
Any questions for the committee on this, or the work group on this recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary adoption of the recommendation.
I'll move preliminary adoption of the recommendation on density bonus.
Thank you. Well, density swap, just make.
Density swap, excuse me.
Thank you, Councilmember Van Vliet. Is there a second?
I second Deb Flagon.
Thank you, Councilmember Flagon. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll turn it over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon, Councilmember Flagon,
Sorry, Matt. Yes.
Councilmember Olson, Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Abstain.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion
And I'm,
passes.
and I'm a yes too. Sorry, I have a bad internet where I'm at. Sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Olson. Motion passes.
Thank you so much. Our third item on this work group is middle housing recommendations. Councilmember Janney, I turn it over to you for any updates on that.
Yep, there's been no changes to this recommendation. It remains as originally proposed.
Okay, I'd entertain or sorry, is there any questions for the work group actually on the recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary recommendation for middle housing.
And move approval.
Thank you, Councilmember Cody.
I'll
Is there a
second. Erica, second.
Oh, Councilmember Mills, thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll turn it over for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Sorry, yes.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tevy.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much for that. The next one on our list is visitability and accessibility. Councilmember Janney?
Yeah, this one
Any updates?
also remains unchanged. There was some public testimony related to the fact that it could be difficult to require the backing in the bathrooms, but when we were going through the writing the recommendation, BCD said that they did not believe that would be too challenging to incorporate into the code. So that would be the only addition I would add.
Okay. Are there any questions for the work group on this recommendation? Okay, I'll entertain a motion for preliminary. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Van Vliet.
Well, I'm going to move preliminary adoption, and I'm going to say that I'd like very much to be more proactive when it comes to housing for people with disabilities more generally. And I think there's a ton of potential for us to be smarter and to be more inclusive in state government. And so I just want to kind of put a pin in, this is a good step, but we ought to be doing a whole heck of a lot more, in my opinion, for people with all kinds of disabilities, not just those in wheelchairs. So that was an extended motion.
Thank you so much. I'll entertain a second first before we get to discussion.
I second. Jeff Flagan.
Thank you, Councilmember Flagan. Any discussion? Councilmember Janney?
I remembered something else too. There was some comment that bathrooms that on first floors that are not large enough for wheelchairs would not need the backing for grab bars. Something that was specifically mentioned by the SME, the SMEs that we had for this group was that grab bars are important for people who are not just in wheelchairs, but for other people who have accessibility needs outside of wheelchairs. So I wanted to put that out there too, that we recognize that not all first floor bathrooms are large enough for wheelchair movements, and that it's not intended that they have to be, but that the grab bars would be there for people with other accessibility needs.
Thank you. Any additional discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you for that. Our last one under codes and design is franchise utility timelines. Councilmember Janney, any updates on this one?
Yeah, there's been no changes. Hopefully Eric is prepared to answer any questions as he was the author of this one, but it remains unchanged.
Great. Are there any questions for the codes and design team on this recommendation? Not seeing any. I'd entertain a motion for preliminary adoption. Oh, sorry. Is there? Oh, sorry, Director Bateman. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was just wondering if there had been any discussion about who enforces the timelines, and does this implicate PUC at all? Do they have a role to play? I'm not exactly sure how the mechanics of this work.
We still haven't received comment back from PUC on exactly what the existing regulations are and how it would fit with them. So that stands out there as a question mark.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Director Bateman, I see your hand's still up. Do you have is there a follow-up? No, you're fine. Okay. So now I'm like I forgot where I was at. Are we preliminary recommendation? Are we in? Or a motion?
We need a motion and a second.
Okay, sorry, I marked things off and I've got myself out of order. So I'd entertain a motion for preliminary adoption for this recommendation on franchise utility timelines.
I'll move.
Thank you, Councilmember Mills.
I'll second it.
I got Councilmember Justice on that one. I think his light went off first. So any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll turn it over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rothwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Yes.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
I'll abstain.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much, Codes and Design team. That wraps up your recommendations for this meeting. We'll move on to the Finance Work Group. And the first recommendation is Insurance and Risk Pool. I'll look to co-chairs Matthews or Bunn on any updates or recommendations of this recommendation.
Yes, I'll take the first one, Daniel. So on the insurance recommendation, we did receive feedback from SMEs that we included in the recommendation, and that feedback is actually in the first paragraph of the recommendation. One of the feedbacks was to include the creation of a state-funded first loss risk pool for rent assistance for rent restricted and affordable housing providers. And then the second potential action that we included was mandatory binding arbitration for all landlord tenant disputes under $25,000. And the third potential action was to study the financial offset of unexpected increases in insurance. So those are three robust conversations with our work group, our guidance committee, and these were the three recommendations that we received from the SMEs that we included in the final proposal.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions for Councilmember Matthews on this recommendation? Director Bell.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tovey. Councilmember Matthews, I really appreciate again this particular recommendation and the specificity that's been added since the last time this particular recommendation was brought and discussed. I have curiosity about the language, the current language setting a mandatory requirement for arbitration by that threshold amount, that 25,000. I'm curious to know a little bit more about the how the word mandatory came to be. Thank you.
So what we try to do is there is some language from my understanding in our state law and our landlord tenant law, which has the arbitration limit set at, I want to say 50,000. And so we thought that we would include that similar language, and we would lower the arbitration dollar amount to 25,000. And we recognize that particular language in that we added is certainly going to be up for more discussion before it actually becomes a final approval if the governor decides to take this up. So I don't know if Daniel or anybody else want to add any additional information.
I can add. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm driving.
Yes.
Yeah. So all civil cases in Oregon under $50,000 get referred to arbitration unless there's an exception. So there's an existing arbitration process. 25,000 was halfway between the existing program, so that's what made sense. And it's at a level that for insurance claims, if an insurance claim comes in $10,000 or $12,000, the insurance company will just pay it versus going to a jury trial. And that is driving up premiums, these small claims. Since we already have an existing arbitration system that works well, trying to say we can get a quicker and cheaper resolution to small claims makes sense. And this isn't limited just to affordable housing. This is all housing. And so if you have been injured and you do justly need compensation, making it an easier process, that's good for the tenant. It's good on the landlord and the insurer side if there's frivolous claims. So there's also some benefits for judicial economy and just saying, hey, small little claims should be handled through the existing arbitration.
Thank you, Councilmember Bunn. You were fading out a little bit, but I think you ended with, does that answer the question? It does answer the question. It's helpful. I have no further questions. I think I just have some remaining curiosity from the tenant perspective, but I am aligned with the intention of this and appreciate the work that has gone into this.
Sorry, are there any other questions for the work group on this recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary adoption of the insurance and risk pool recommendation.
Chair Tovey, I move for preliminary adoption of this recommendation.
Second, this is
Thank you,
Andrea Bell.
And second by Director Bell. Any discussion on the motion?
If I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tovey. I just want to acknowledge I was copied on some public comment from the Housing Authorities of Oregon, as well as Housing Oregon, both obviously a membership organization of the public housing authorities around the state of Oregon, and then Housing Oregon is our industry support network for affordable housing providers. And both associations and memberships are very interested in this recommendation and acknowledge that the insurance issue and cost is being a big detriment, particularly to affordable housing production and frankly management going forward. So I wanted this council was aware of that interest, in particular from our.
Thank you so much. Any additional discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Abstain.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. The next one on the finance work group, third readings are local infrastructure and funding surge. Co-chairs Matthews or Bunn, do you have any updates on this recommendation?
No updates.
No.
As presented, it's a bunch of money, but yeah, we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Are there any questions for the work group on this recommendation? Councilmember Bateman.
I think you might have answered my question with your comment that it is a bunch of money. I just wanted to confirm that this is more of a general revenue generator, and it's not pointed towards any specific project. It's not tied to any of the specific other things that we've talked about on the roster. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes, it's really calling attention to the fact that there has to be new revenue to address some fundamental issues that are holding back housing.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Bell?
Yes, thank you, Co-Chair Tovey. I really appreciate this recommendation. Could you just clarify for me? I thought during the initial reading, there was a comment that this particular proposal was a placeholder that was connected to one of the other recommendations to ensure that we had one specific proposal that was aimed at generating resources specific with infrastructure in mind. And so I wanted to, one, check my memory to see if that is still accurate, and if so, which other recommendation is it tied to, if at all? Thank you.
I may be able to help on that. There are a couple infrastructure recommendations that we've already preliminarily adopted. And at that time, when they were still in draft and working through the work group process, there was a question of, well, we like the infrastructure fund concept, but how do we fund the infrastructure fund? And we split it apart and said, hey, let's talk about funding in one and talk about creation of the structure in another recommendation. So that this is the funding part and the new revenues like Daniel was talking about, but it's not necessarily tied only to the infrastructure fund recommendation. I think that there are, I can't list them all, but there are a host of recommendations that would need, appropriations from the state. To the extent existing funds are not sufficient for such appropriations, we would need to create new revenue streams. This is, I believe, the finance group attempting to identify some ideas about what those revenue streams could be. So this is not earmarked for a particular recommendation. It's a recommendation on, hey, if we could use new funds, where could those come from? And then let the legislative process to connect funds to particular uses.
Thank you for that.
I will add to that, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add, though, in the Finance Committee, we did talk a lot about how this needs to be funding for local governments, not a huge revenue raise that goes to ODOT or goes to state programs. We've put a lot of burden on local governments. We're asking a lot of them, and they need resources to carry out their jobs to enable housing. So that is one little distinction, but again, it's not tied to any one particular recommendation. We see it most in local infrastructure, is where jurisdictions are telling us we just can't keep up with the different revenue limitations we have with property tax and whatever. We can't do our jobs as cities and counties. So that's the discussion at Finance over 6 months that resulted in this recommendation.
Thank you. Director Bell, do you have another?
Yes, thank you for that, Councilor Bunn. Co-Chair Tovey, if I can just make sure I'm mirroring back what I think that I'm hearing for accuracy prior to the vote. So I think what I'm hearing is that this particular recommendation is not specifically tied to any other recommendations. This is in anticipation for there needing to be a revenue source for some of the other recommendations as the governor and the legislative body is thinking about those funding streams and the vehicle by which we fund some of those other recommendations. This is in anticipation for that. That's the one that I'm hearing. And then as a secondary, what I'm also hearing from Councilor Bunn is that, and I embrace this and I hear this, is that quite frankly, to make sure that our local governments have funding and resources to do the things that they are already doing and probably likely unfunded or severely underfunded. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Any additional questions for the Finance Work Group on the local infrastructure funding surge recommendation? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for preliminary adoption of this recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I move preliminary adoption of the local infrastructure funding surge recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember Bunn. And can I get a second?
Second, Andrea Bell.
Thank you, Councilmember Bell. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Madsen.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tovey. I just would like to acknowledge that I understand the distinction. I just want to go on the record of saying I really appreciate the programmatic detail on our infrastructure recommendation that was seen earlier in the process. And to me, what I'm referring to is the focus on creation of affordable housing and really tying the programmatic priorities to how we're addressing the housing needs in our communities for those folks of lower incomes. And I wanted to mention that prior to the vote.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
Yes.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Abstain.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much for that. The third on our list for finance work group is catalyzing Portland recommendation. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Matthews or Bunn for any updates or commentary on this recommendation.
I do not believe
No
there's-
major up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Daniel. I don't
Go
believe
ahead,
there's been
Tom.
any
Yeah.
changes. Yeah. I think we were going to say the same thing. So there you go. We have concurrence from leadership. So
Okay.
We have concurrence. There is one note to call attention to is that while we call this catalyzing Portland, as you read the text, these are good ideas for the entire state. So we're not just picking on Metro. We're calling it out because that's where the low-hanging fruit for quick, effective action is. But actually, these are all good concepts for any jurisdiction.
A question from Director Bell.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tovey. I'm full of comments and curiosities today, so I appreciate it. I appreciate this recommendation. I feel like this is one of that's packed into, there's a lot packed into that. And so I appreciate the thoughtfulness and that recommendation being robust. I also appreciate the comment that while the framing and the title calls out one particular city, I think what we also know is that all of much of this work is all interconnected. And so I think once we see progress, as we see progress, measurable and inclusive progress, that is a benefit for all communities and for all of us. And so I appreciate that acknowledgement. I'm curious to learn, and I think, Tom, you may have been closest to this, but I was curious in your conversations with any SMEs, if there were any considerations or just thoughts around implementation of these things. I think these are things that are already existing now. So this would be sort of utilizing the framework and the infrastructure that's there, but curiosity about anything gleaned from the SMEs about implementation of any for these to be successful. Thank you.
Yeah, my observation would be that yes, quite a bit. And thank you for the question. I think this is really kind of like adding this recommendation is bringing state tailwind to what is already happening in the city of Portland, recognizing that some of the initiatives that are being examined and or presented to city council may not be actually implemented. So this kind of is a reaffirming of some of the things that have been researched and are being explored within the context of the city currently, and they should be commended for kind of getting out in front of some of these things to try to figure out how not only they can bring on more housing supply within the city, but also specifically the central city, which is suffering from office vacancy as well.
While we're doing the discussion thing, I'd piggyback on that, especially about the conversions in the central city. I know there's been a lot of talk about office to residential conversion, and a lot of folks kind of kicking the tires and trying to find the sweet spot of like, where does it actually work? I think what might actually happen in the short run to make some of that more viable is that current owners will be who have a debt burden to cover, and it doesn't work while they do the conversion. Those owners will then be replaced by financial institutions who don't have the same debt burden and are looking for options with the same buildings. So I think that the viability of that from a financial perspective, it'd be a good time for the state to create some incentives, because some of that may be happening. Well, some of that is happening, and some more maybe as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Janney.
In this recommendation, it talks about suspending type 3 design review. We have other recommendations that have similar language, don't we?
I think Gory had a recommendation that was in that vein.
Yes, and that was approved. Sorry, my mouth is full of food. So yes.
Okay, and then I'll save for discussion.
Okay. Any other questions on this recommendation for the work group? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary adoption of the Catalyzing Portland recommendation.
I move approval for preliminary adoption.
I'll second it.
Second.
And a second from Councilmember Justice. He got it first. Any discussion? Did you want to add something for that? Go ahead, Councilmember Janney.
I voiced this at the last meeting too. I just would hesitate to expand too much the waivers of SDCs for certain classes or certain areas. I still really am concerned that that's going to cause cities to increase their SDCs, partially because when I talked to a city about this, they said, well, we'll just increase our SDCs. And so by increasing the SDCs, when SDCs are baked into the price of a new home, and it goes into the appraisal of the home. And so you end up driving up the price of all other appraisals because of, higher SDCs. So I just really hesitate to make this one group, just the implications, the unintended consequences of SDCs, of waivers, I'm still really concerned about.
Thank you. Councilmember Wood.
So I've probably done more in SDC background and information than a lot of people on here. And so my understanding from what I've been explained in the past is if a city's going to waive SDCs or the state's going to mandate the city waive SDCs, there has to be some type of a backfill of where that money is going to come from. It simply can't be raising SDCs on other. Natalie, I know people will say that, but I heard an analogy one time that was really good in helping explaining. It said, if 100 new homes need a sewer plant that's going to cost $1 million, you have to take the $1 million and divide it by the 100 new homes. You can't divide the cost of that by 80 homes and then waive it on 20 because that's not their impact on the thing. So it has to actually be calculated as to their impact on the system, and it can't just be offset because their fees are higher. So legally, I don't think cities can raise them, but that doesn't. But then they have to figure out where's that money coming from. So I think SDC waivers are great. We use them in Portland all the time, and I think it should be expanded. But I think we just have to make sure we know how cities are going to fund that backfill of information or a backfill of money.
Councilmember Rockwell.
I think if we were looking at this as the only thing, I would agree with what Natalie said, but in what we just passed today was a whole slew of fundraising recommendations that are supposed to be looked at in the entire package. So that way we're not just proposing waivers, but we're also including the revenue sources to offset those. If it was a standalone conversation, then I think you're right. We're then creating that system where the local infrastructures are already underfunded, and now we're just cutting away more resources from them. It has to be tied with something. So when we go to do our final recommendation, I think we need to really be thoughtful about what the whole package looks like, so that these pieces, while they have the possibility of being pulled away in once they leave our world, our baby nest, into not the iterations that we want them to be, but it is, to me, it's a robust package of recommendations that we're putting together, and they can't work as effectively if they're going to be piecemealed out.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Van Vliet, I think your hand was up. Did you say your concerns
I was
addressed?
going to say the same thing that Karen said, so I can mute myself again. I took my hand back down.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments or discussion on the motion, actually? Sounds good. I will turn it over to Matt for a roll call vote on the motion.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagon.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajvaidya.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Yes.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tubby.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much for that. Our next recommendation on our agenda is the Housing Finance Agency creation, a recommendation from the Finance Work Group. Is there any updates or commentary from the work group? Chairs Matthews or Bunn?
No formal updates or amendments, but we are happy to answer questions. I do know that I'm not sure, I think it was included in the last packet. We got a good piece of testimony circulated from the Oregon Bankers Association, which I would recommend everybody take a look at some point. But yeah, other than that, happy to answer questions.
Any questions for the work group on this recommendation? Director Bell.
Yes, thank you, Co-Chair Tovey. I just want to make sure I'm tracking before I get into just a couple of quick comments. The public comment Councilor Bunn is referring to, that's the one that we received today. Is that right? From the Oregon Bankers Association. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. So first off, let me just say I appreciate the spirit of this particular recommendation, along with sort of the cacophony of finance recommendations today. I think it was mentioned during our in-person meeting, where at that time, I think the finance group didn't have that many recommendations, and Councilor Bunn had mentioned, oh, there's going to be a whole host of them coming, and you all have brought it. So I'm just appreciative of the spirit of so many of these recommendations. I'm excited. Candidly, this is one of the few that I have spent the most time thinking about, this one and a couple in some of the other groups beyond the finance group. And I was thinking about the group agreements that we had around sort of early on, some of the shared agreements that we had. And one of them was around, you know, be willing to do things differently, listening to understand. And then one particular one around accepting non-closure a bit. And so as I was thinking about it, I embrace the idea of and the aspiration that there is like an inherent mandate for change that has to happen at all levels. And I don't think any of us are in the good fortune of being too comfortable in that. And so I appreciate that. I think one of the other reflections, and I don't think, unless there's comments on it, not requesting any particular feedback on it, but one of the reflections that I had was I actually think there's a broader mandate beyond one particular agency. And so in some of the recommendations, it mentions the housing agency, it mentions some of the other state agencies, some that are here, some that aren't. But I actually think there's a larger mandate beyond just one or two agencies. And the reason why I think about that is as I went through all the recommendations, there's a correlating theme, and a correlating theme is either not holding to things that we've done because we've done them and needing to make some really big shifts towards things in pursuit of progress for the people that we serve. And one of the reflections was that, and this is not a dig on anyone, I oversee a state agency, so I'm in it, but that state government as a whole was not built for speed or efficiency. It was built for efficiency, but not so much speed. It was not built for speed. It wasn't really built for trying on new things at a regular pace. It was built for cost containment and structure and oversight, checks and balances, things that are really important. And so I would just offer that as we think about all of the finance recommendations, but this one particular, just thinking about the need for state government as a whole to shift into sort of a higher place of being in that. And then the last thing I will just say, and then I'll yield back to the co-chairs in that, is as I was thinking about the governor's mandate around production and of affordable and market rate, and thinking about urgency and speed in that, I don't at this point see how this one gets us there when I think about it in comparison to some of the other finance recommendations. And so I embrace sort of, I think, what is the spirit of this particular recommendation in terms of looking at our structures and shifting some of our structures to do new things in real ways. And so I appreciate the spirit of that and wanted to just offer a couple of those comments as we continue to tackle this and live up to the mandate that we're all in as part of the executive order on production.
For that, is there any response from the co-chair or from the work group? I don't know if there was a question in that, Director Bell. Was there a clear question or
no question, Co-Chair Tovey. I just wanted to offer a couple of comments as I was going through this particular recommendation.
I will say for myself, I think.
Go ahead, Councilmember Bunn. Go ahead.
No, I think a lot of those comments are spot on. Part of what's frustrating is that you're right. Government is not built, to move fast and break things. And most of the time, that's really, really good. We don't want government doing that. This is an out-of-the-box idea in response to an emergency. And ultimately, we're not the final decision makers on it. It's a balancing test of moving government outside its normal way of operating. And I don't know ultimately if that's the right method to pursue. That's a call for people way higher up the pay scale than me. That's the job for the governor and the legislature. But I do want to go on the record as saying I agree and I understand your comments. So.
Thank you. Director Bateman.
Yeah, I just wanted to double check, as I recall from previous conversations around this, that part of the need that was identified was the ability to compete for some of the expertise that we need in this sector with regard to folks who can do underwriting and fulfill those types of efforts. I just wanted to put on the table that drawing some from my experience in Business Oregon, there are agencies that actually have classification and pay scales unto their own, like no other agencies have them, because of this very need for the expertise and the skills that otherwise couldn't compete well on the private sector with the private sector. So I just wanted to note that if that's part of what you're trying to get to here with a completely separate entity, that you can actually open up a whole separate channel of job classifications and pay scales, and that would be something worth looking into or asking for, and it might be easier than spinning off an entire organization. But I've seen that done. I think it's possible. Just wanted to offer that up as a possible solution as well.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yeah, thank you, Director Bateman, and thank you, Director Bell. Appreciate your thoughtfulness here today. So a couple things I would offer. this one isn't going to make a very fast difference because the process, I think, is part of your point, is going to be laborious. And the recommendation is to kind of do a study to see if the thesis of this could help in the long run. Would there be pay value? And so I think some of those things, just putting it on the table, is, there's a lot of assumptions baked into this recommendation. They would need to be tested and studied and all of that. To the question of, is it out of the box? It's out of the box for Oregon, but it's not out of the box nationally. Most states do have some version of a quasi-independent Housing Finance Commission or Housing Finance Authority that is not within the executive branch proper. And so Oregon is a little bit of an anomaly. And so I just want to, it's not like some wildly untested model. Now every state does it a little bit differently, but just to those who haven't had the chance to read all 13 pages, know that it's not that out of the box. It would be very different, and it would create a big need for change in our system. I think the other thing I would just note, and I think Director Bateman, I was not aware of the idea that you can get special classifications. I think that's clearly a thing to pursue and consider. I think the other part is it's about kind of building a particular skill set inside the agency. It's also about building a skill set in the governing body and having that fiduciary oversight as the volumes of money that are kind of coming through the agency today, which dwarfs anything I had anything to do with, so there's also this idea that the commission, the Housing Stability Council, whoever it is that's overseeing, can play a much deeper fiduciary role than I think they are today. They're playing a good policy role. It's a little bit different than financial stewardship. So that's just another piece I want to put on the table besides the staff. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
Thank you for that. And I saw your hand up too. Councilmember Madsen, did you have a comment? Or
thank you for all of the comments, and Margaret, thank you for acknowledging that this is not really an out-of-the-box proposal. Our neighboring states certainly have that, and it's pretty prolific across our nation as well to have these separate housing finance agencies. I, in a similar vein to a comment I made earlier on the insurance fund, I wanted to acknowledge comment that I received from the Housing Authorities of Oregon, which is again the statewide membership, that are very intrigued about this and acknowledge that very issue, that this is an idea that many of our neighboring states have adopted and it's worth exploring. So I wanted to put that into the record as well.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for the work group team on the Housing Financial Agency creation? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to preliminary adopt this recommendation.
I would
Mr.
like
Chairman, I yield to Councilmember Van Vliet.
Thank you, Councilor Bunn. I would like to move preliminary adoption of the HFA recommendation.
Second.
And Councilmember Bunn got a second. Thank you so much. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll turn over to Matt for roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Abstain.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much, everybody. Our next item on our agenda is consolidated tax reform. Are there any updates or comments from the work group, the chairs or otherwise, on this recommendation?
No updates or comments, but happy to answer questions.
Okay. Any questions for the work group on this recommendation? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary adoption for the recommendation for consolidated tax reform.
Mr.
Councilmember
Chairman, I
Flagan.
move preliminary adoption of the consolidated tax reform recommendation.
Okay. Councilmember Flagan, did you have a comment or?
I can wait for the discussion. It's fine.
Okay. Let's go ahead and entertain a second.
Second, Andrea Bell.
Thank you, Director Bell. Any discussion? Councilmember Flagan.
Has there been any discussion about breaking these things apart instead of us voting on all of them together?
I don't think we've had any material discussion at the committee, but I don't think anybody would particularly care. Each of these items would require significant additional study. They all have their pros and cons. I think the intent of the original concept here was to call attention to the fact that we have some fundamental things that we need to change, on property tax, and then we added in some other items that also makes sense as being aligned with public policy for supporting housing. But I would leave that up to the co-chairs on getting into individual votes on tax proposals.
I would offer up, I think that most, if not all, the recommendations will have nuggets that may flourish more than the whole recommendation. I'm guessing on how some of these might flow forward. And so I have an opinion that we can adopt the recommendation as a whole, and then the nuggets of it can be adopted or can be put forward by champions on the implementation side, without having to break it all up. But I'm neither here nor there on it.
I think in regards to the Finance Committee, my concern is regarding a few of the items that have been brought forward. I think that there is going to be unintended consequences in regards to housing production. Just removing the Measure 50 item I think, can be problematic. Living in another state at one point that had property taxes that didn't have caps on it, it definitely affects the individuals that are living in those states. And if you continue to increase property taxes, it takes money out of their day-to-day ability to purchase a home. And so that's one of my major concerns. The second item is that I do think that there is property tax concerns for our cities, and being able to allow cities to increase property taxes. I understand that that's what this is based on, so we could have more infrastructure capital. I would be more apt to say that there are cities that were capped at a lower rate, and so I would be more in favor of having a one-time true-up to allow cities to get to an even playing field. An example is City of Redmond has a higher tax base than the City of Bend because of when that went into effect, and they'll never make up the difference. So I will not be voting in favor of this just because I can't vote in favor of all 5 of the items.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair Tuvey. I totally get what you're saying, and I'm not going to try and talk you out of that. What I would offer is the discussion at the committee level was more about the just overall tax policy is creates lots of unintended consequences. And we really did debate about doing a package recognize versus individual ones, recognizing that all of them would be a huge lift, like, and any one would be a huge lift. And they're all going to need to be studied and debated and all of that. But Moore wanted to sort of raise the point, you know, we have our tax code writ large has in many ways gotten in the way of housing production and the ability of cities and counties to provide basic services. And so it's sort of like making a statement that we need tax reform, and here's some ideas. So just wanted to offer that, not particularly in response to your concern, you know, it's very specifically, but just so you know a little bit more about what the committee was thinking.
For that, Councilmember Flagan, your hand's still up. Do you have another? Okay. Councilmember Janney.
I appreciate, Margaret, your comments that you just made. I was just thinking, you know, I might have some complicated feelings about this, given that Salem, there's been a lot of discussion about making up things because of a lack of property tax, and we just had a vote on a payroll tax. So I thought I read in here somewhere about how, you know, this, if we raise property taxes, we wouldn't have to have bonds. And because we already passed bonds for things, that was partially a justification for this. That didn't sit super great with me. Again, Salem's had a couple of bonds that have failed because they were too much. And then they had one for the police station, failed. They went back, they pared it back, and they passed the second one. And I worry that when we just raise property taxes, it takes out a little bit of that check and balance that you can have between the citizens and the local government. So I understand that this is just like a list of things that you could do, but that was just one of my things that I thought of when I was reading through it.
I can talk to that briefly, Natalie. So I think wasn't so much bonds, but we were talking about local option levies, which are 5 years just for operating. But to use the Salem example, I think there's plenty of checks that still exist. Salem City Council put in a payroll tax. The voters didn't want it. They put it up to referendum and defeated it. So having been a local elected official, I can tell you, just having the ability to raise taxes doesn't necessarily mean it will happen. People or local electeds are very responsive to what their constituents want. So I'm more comfortable raising revenue at the local level than I am at the state or the federal level, honestly. But that's because I'm super biased, having been a local elected official. We have this huge gap between what we're expecting, what people want government to do, and what we're willing to pay for. And that's just the nature of governments and societies in general, I suppose. But if we really want to not lower our standards that we've set here in Oregon, you know, environmental standards, UGB, you name it, it's going to cost more. And so this is one step towards forcing that discussion of, do we want to pay more taxes, or do we want to moderate what our expectations are from government? I'm not wild about necessarily all of these recommendations either as a taxpayer. I think we've got a pretty high tax burden in Oregon. I don't really want to see it go up. But going back to the executive order and looking at what are the impediments to housing production, if we don't want to moderate some of our other standards, we're going to have to raise more revenue. So I know that's not a perfect answer, but that's what my thought process was in getting to this conclusion.
Councilmember Flagan.
Daniel, you just said that you're not wild about all of them, you know, from a property tax increase, but are you, from a housing production point of view, looking at these, I mean, you're way more intimate with what the conversation was. Are you concerned that there's any that are going to not produce housing or increase housing, and it could have an opposing effect?
I think it entirely depends on how the government spends the money that's raised. I think if you raise property tax and you blow it all on non-essential services, yeah, that'll be a dead weight loss. It's really hard. we put some thought into, do we limit the things that the money could be spent on? Maybe you say you can have property tax, but it's only for certain things. But the things that are holding back communities are vastly different across the state. Critical infrastructure for some communities is police officers. They don't have enough cops or firefighters. Some places it's roads, some places it's a sewer treatment plant. We are bound to the choices that local governments make, and I don't see a way around that. So on balance, I think if good decisions are made, this will move housing in the right direction, but that depends on how much you trust local elected officials.
Okay. I believe any other discussion or on the motion? Okay, I will turn over to Matt for a roll call vote on consolidated tax reform.
Councilmember Button,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan,
No.
Councilmember Olson.
Abstain.
Sorry, what was that, Councilmember Olson?
Abstain.
Abstain.
Councilmember Mills,
No.
Councilmember Rajbadia,
Abstain.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Madsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
I'm gonna vote no for now.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
No.
Councilmember Hill,
No.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey,
Yes.
How's the math there, Matt?
motion passes.
All right. Well, I want to just thank everyone for a really good conversation on that. You know, Margaret said any one of these things is a huge lift. And I think none of these things is politically viable outside the context of some larger conversation and set of policies. So, you know, picking any one of them out and saying, could we do it? And what are the pros and cons? Is just by itself, it's going to take some really big coalition building on the political side to do anything close to any of these. So I appreciate the conversation and everybody's thoughtful voting of your conscience. So thank you. Back to you, JD.
Agreed. Thank you. Next recommendation on our agenda is Modular Housing Incentive Program. Are there any updates or commentary from the Finance Work Group?
No, except one of our colleagues suggested a revision to expand this recommendation to include alternative building methods as approved by the Building Code Division, and not specifically tying this recommendation to modular housing. So I think we should put that up for discussion. I wrote the recommendation, and I'm not, you know, I wrote it specific to modular housing, the SMEs, you know, our SMEs regarding modular housing, the work group topics and others. Some of it does have to do with innovation, and there's other innovative, you know, construction types, concrete 3D printing and things like that. But I don't feel comfortable, you know, that there's the basis in the recommendation for, say, something like that. But I put that out there for discussion for the larger group.
So just for clarity, so that recommendation for the amendment came in after, so that's not included in what's currently being presented.
That's correct. Yeah, it's just a recent requested revision to the recommendation.
And are you asking to have that like an amended? Like
I am not.
rec-
No, I'm not comfortable with it, but I wanted to bring it up for consideration for the larger committee.
And I would, so before I open up for discussion or questions, I mean, the option is there is an option to pull it and bring it back for the next meeting if you want to make it revisions to it. So I just throw that out there. But I'll quickly turn to Councilmember Flagan for any questions.
Councilor Cody, thank you for bringing my concern forward. That was my interaction with the Finance Committee. I was asking the question in regards to, is this, if we're trying to produce additional housing units, is this just related to modular housing, or could we expand this to all alternative housing types to encourage more housing? And so that was the angle that I was trying to ask. I do think that the current recommendation is definitely specific to modular housing. So I understand why Councilor Cody maybe doesn't want to take this and just to add that item to it. And I don't know if we're too far along to add a second item. So this was just my question is could it be added at this point?
Do you have a response? That sounds more like.
Thanks, Deb. Oh yeah. Let's hear from Andrea, and then we'll sort out procedurally what we're gonna do. Director Bell. Pardon.
Yeah, no, you're fine. Co-chairs, I appreciate this. Giving you some thinking time, Co-Chair Hall, on the procedural stuff. I'll maybe just make a couple of points of consideration. So Councilor Cody, I really appreciate you bringing this up. I think in its current form, I am supportive of this. And so it would feel short-sighted and inconsistent with the way of the group to just do some verbal change, just to do some plain text changes. I feel like this would need to go through the rigor that the other recommendations have gone through. So it would seem short-sighted and less than our best work to just make those changes. And so I would collectively summons us to do more than that. That's thing one. Secondly, I think the other piece of this as we think about modular, and I think Councilor Flagan, you brought up a really salient point around sort of alternative housing models. I think what's really interesting about that is more and more, most of these housing models are less and less alternative and more of sort of what the standard of what a lot of people of Oregon are seeking to see when we talk about production and more production of affordable housing. I think the summons is for housing in all shapes and sizes. And so I would be supportive of, and also have curiosity on the procedure of this. I would be curious to have this broadened, but I would also want to make sure that it is going through the rigor that all of the other recommendations have gone through. So I appreciate the call out to have this broadened of other housing models and not have it be bound specific to modular housing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll just give you an example of why I'm slightly uncomfortable with just tacking it on. Is because, like, say, concrete, there's quite a bit of support in the recommendation for specifically for modular housing, because that's what it was focused on. And that support does not apply, nor is it relevant. In fact, it's counter to other types of innovative housing or alternate, quote unquote, alternative housing types. So, and I'm just not knowledgeable about those alternative housing types. So I wouldn't want to pretend to be. I guess one potential solution is we could add in the implementation section specifically that alternative methods could or should be explored in addition to modular. But anyway, I just throw that out for consideration. I just want to admit to you guys where I was coming from on this and what I don't know.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Van Vliet.
Thank you. I think what I would add to this conversation is other states and actually other countries have scaled up their housing production very explicitly by industrializing the construction techniques. And so modular is a methodology that's proven and tested in lots of other markets. Oregon is kind of behind the curve. That said, I am a big proponent of, we got to figure out how to incentivize all kinds of creativity. And some of you know, my big shtick is mass timber in housing. And there's, work happening on the side in some of that. And I'm aware of some of the 3D printing. I don't think any of us are saying we shouldn't continue to innovate, but those other things haven't been proven to work at scale like modular has. And so I just wanted to add that to my rationale for keeping this one tightly focused on modular.
Before we get too deep into it, and I appreciate the conversation, and I just want to, and we actually do have time to go for a bit, but just building off something Tom mentioned, does it thread the needle for this group if we have the modular recommendation with the financial incentives and all the research and SME input that's gone into modular specific, and then what we tack on instead of saying expand that incentive package to everything else is some sort of analyze innovative housing techniques, or whatever the right phrase is, from other alternative housing techniques, and the viability of a similar incentive package at some future date for those. So it's more of a the recommendation is do the analysis on things that aren't modular, because we haven't done that yet. Does that thread the needle for folks?
I'm certainly comfortable with that. It looks like Deb is supportive of that, but Riley, maybe we should hear from Riley.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll give Councilmember Flagon's hand was up first. Do you want to go ahead, Councilmember Flagon?
I was just going to say that if it's an option to do what Councilor Cody had suggested, that I was fine with that. And I think building codes could make that determination. I mean, as the entity, as a suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hill.
This is the recommendation I think that I struggled with the most, and I got the most pushback on from industry members that I talked to, is that if it is more efficient and it is cheaper to build with modular, why do we have to give them a $20,000 bounty or bonus, especially when the legislature made $20 million available on the last go around to build such facilities? And if you're going to give $20,000 bonus to one section, you need to give a $20,000 bonus to the other section, especially with the argument that it's cheaper to build and it's more efficient to build. So that should lower the cost, not be given a bounty for it. That's the comments that I'm getting, and I kind of subscribe to most of them.
That's fair, Commissioner Hill, and thank you for the feedback. We also have a second recommendation called, I think it's called the housing bounty. But also, I mean, the purpose is because the industry essentially doesn't exist today. So it's an incentive to bolster up and to create capacity in this industry in Oregon specifically. The industry exists in Idaho and other places, but your comment is well taken.
Councilmember Bunn.
Adding on to Riley's comments, I think I raised this at committee, but maybe it was a conversation I had with myself, so I'll just rehab it here. We have an extensive set of mobile home production here in the state of Oregon. If a $20,000 incentive will move the needle dramatically, that's 1/7 or 1/8 of the cost of what we're paying on a per unit basis for Lyft, putting dollars per units. Why wouldn't we extend it to mobile homes? And I don't really have a satisfactory answer for that. I support modular housing, but there's lots of solutions out there. I know we think modular housing is kind of sexy, and we all want it to be the one silver bullet solution. There's probably not one silver bullet, but I'm trying to wrap my head around Riley's comments of saying, if a subsidy is good, why target it so narrowly? Especially if it's on an industry that is supposed to be more efficient. And maybe we just say that's because we want to get it kickstarted, and we need to get it rolling and kickstarted. But does that produce more housing in the long run than subsidizing at $20,000 per unit delivery methods that we already have in place?
I don't know if you have a response to that, Cody, or was there a real question in there?
There's no question. That was just my thought process. That I think I'm with Riley, but it's difficult.
Yeah. Okay. Councilmember Mills.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tubby. So I have a couple of questions for clarity. One, I understand that there is a fair amount of modular home manufacturing, we'll say, happening in Idaho and California. Are those homes able to be shipped to and assembled in Oregon? Yes.
They're not the California homes because there's not reciprocity in permitting currently between Oregon and California, but there is between Oregon and Idaho. So some modular housing that you have seen implemented in Oregon has come from Idaho, but this recommendation would not apply to Idaho manufacturers.
Sure. No. Yes, of course. Okay. So the next question for clarity: the $20,000 incentive, is that to be paid to the manufacturer?
Yes.
Okay. So in light of the fact that homes are being constructed relatively effectively in other states, and the state of Oregon is already putting a $20 million incentive for the construction of, or the bolstering of facilities in Oregon, I wonder if the problem isn't the solved by incentivizing the manufacturers, but perhaps there's a code issue that's really at the root of why, or some other technicality that's at the root of why we're having a hard time establishing modular homes in Oregon. And it's less about the manufacturing, more about some other legal components.
Same. Is there a question on that, or is that more?
Well, I mean, that's the question. I wonder, and if anybody has the answer, that would be fantastic. And so because of that, I'm just a little bit concerned that this may not actually resolve the problem. We may move money around, but not move the needle.
Could I jump in? I think I might have an answer to that. But
go ahead.
So I think
yeah, if you're responding directly to that, go ahead, Bentley. Go ahead. Yes, I'm saying if you're responding directly to that, go ahead.
I am responding directly to that. So it's my understanding that there hasn't been the demand for whatever reason. And so we don't have it at scale. And so part of it is to be able to incentivize getting the factories up and going. The $20 million will be out. It hasn't been allocated yet. It's my understanding it's somewhere in the process. It will be shortly. But that's going to help 2 or 3 factories, maybe 4 or something. But they have to have consistent demand, and you have to be producing at scale in order for the cost efficiencies to be realized. And so there's a long lead time, and factory operators will tell you it just takes you have to have demand consistent to be able to generate a factory that's efficient. It is also a different product than manufactured housing, what we used to call mobile homes, and those factories are not set up to do the same thing that modulars are in today's world. So
thank you. Councilmember Wood.
So, I mean, a little bit of a response, just my opinion on this, and I've looked into doing some modular stuff, and granted, I don't do large projects, but part of the challenge that we have here is I've been building houses for 25 years in the Portland area, and it's hard for me to duplicate the same plan over and over. Idaho, for example, we might not realize this, but Idaho is a mostly flat state. They don't have our tight land use system. They're building on large lots. They have a lot more flexibility in their design, and they also don't have the planning and zoning requirements that vary from city to city to city like we have in Oregon. So it's pretty easy for somebody to take a plan in Oregon and modulize it and repeat it 100, in Idaho 100 times or 200 times, if you so choose to do so. The challenge I have with this a little bit is that I don't think we have any lumber guys here, and I'm not going to throw them under the bus a little bit on this, but lumber guys and the guys who make the modular systems, if the finances work, they're going to do it. And if we've got the demand for it, they're going to do it because they're in this to make money. So, it's not so much the modular guys that need the incentivized to do it. It's the builders that need to who need to ask for it, because if there's the demand for it, the industry will supply the demand. And I just don't know that that's there for a variety of reasons. And I just don't know that it's hard for me to say that we don't need this, because I do think modular stuff's important, but I just don't know that this is the way to get there.
Then just a couple. Oh, go ahead, Natalie.
Go ahead, Damien.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So just observations on this, because these are all salient points, right? There's cost and there's speed are really kind of the ideas about like what are the benefits of modular. I've had a couple clients that really wanted to push the envelope and go for modular and got to the point of, construction estimates and pivoted and went to traditional construction. And what the analysis was, and this is in the Portland metro area, it might not hold true everywhere, but this is the information that I have to share, is the benefit is that you have less construction days, right? It's not that it's necessarily cheaper. It's just that the folks are on site and you have less construction exposure, and that's a benefit there. So, but that was offset in Portland by a whole lot of permitting. So the whole entire project didn't actually get shorter, but it did shorten up the construction days, and there was a bunch of benefits associated with that. The version we looked at, and this is all in the last 3 years or so, was not sort of like cheaper as far as construction dollars per square foot type analysis. So if the incentive gets to some of that and makes it a little bit cheaper, that also is, I think, accretive to solving the equation of what we need to make modular, popular, in demand, replicable, all that, right? So one part is, we've got to permit it well and efficiently, or else we're losing a huge part of the benefit of it, which is speed. And then the other is we've got to make it, financially better, because I don't think it is just cheaper, when you compare apples to apples. So I think, is this the only, is an incentive, does it get at all that? No, but it probably gets at the cost element to some degree. So that's the analysis I've seen done on modular.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Janney.
Is there much information on like the long-term equity of modular housing?
Only as I know it with regard, I think as a completed project or product, it's housing. So it's subject to the same equal opportunity. And if you're building for a customer that has specific equity goals and parameters, then yes, on that side. But the only I think the true benefit is that factories tend to attract more different kinds of people into the construction industry than a traditional job site. So the idea of industrializing construction and bringing 50 to 60% of the scope of a construction project into a factory results in more different kinds of people coming into the trades. but I don't have data on that, but that's what I understand to be the case. And that's what I've personally seen when I've toured modular factories.
Okay. Any other questions for the work group? So I would entertain a motion if there's one to be had.
Let me make a run at it then. I move preliminary approval with the addition in the implementation section of the recommendation that alternative housing, innovative housing types, alternative housing methods be also researched and considered in the implementation of the recommendation. Sorry to be so clumsy.
I would like to second that motion.
Thank you for that. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Mills.
Thanks. I'm going to vote no on this one, and I just want to take an opportunity to explain why I fully support modular home manufacturing. I think that its implementation really needs to be vastly improved in the state of Oregon. I think that modular and other innovative technologies are really going to be the key to our solution to the housing crisis that we're experiencing. And yet I don't think that this recommendation is quite there yet. I would be fully supportive of participating in further investigation and perhaps rewriting it, but I think where it's at right now, it's not quite, I don't feel comfortable voting yes on it. Thank you.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yeah, so I shared my consternation earlier in the discussion. I'm going to vote yes, because I don't think we can let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Yeah, I can think of a lot of ways we might tweak this to make it better, but if we get back to the executive order, if this was implemented, I think it would lead to more housing. There's a lot of recommendations coming out of finance, though, that, yeah, if they stand on their own, but it's going to be a whole constellation of recommendations. So I think this is the piece that's worth pushing forward, even if it might not on its own be perfect. So that's all by way of saying I'm going to vote for it.
Any other discussions on the motion? Okay, I will turn over to Matt for a roll call vote on the modular housing incentive program recommendation as amended.
Councilmember Bunn,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan,
Yes.
Councilmember Olson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mills,
No.
Councilmember Rajbaida,
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews,
Yes.
Councilmember Wood,
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet,
Yes.
Councilmember Janney,
Yes.
Councilmember Hill,
No.
Councilmember Justice,
Yes.
Councilmember Cody,
Yes.
Senator Jama,
Yes.
Director Bell,
Yes.
Director Bateman,
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall,
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you for that lively discussion. I think it's really good. I think it also inspires us to have additional comments. I think I'm hoping these recommendations aren't the end of the conversation in housing production. So I think even some of these commentary and notes will actually live somehow through either the document or through additional work that has gone on in the implementation afterwards. So I hope that no one thinks that any idea has been lost in this discussion or vote. We'll go on to our second to last for the day is the housing cash bounty recommendation. So I'll turn that over to the Finance Committee for any updates or commentary on that recommendation.
No updates.
Okay. Are there any questions for the Finance Committee on this recommendation? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for preliminary approval of the housing cash bounty recommendation.
So moved.
I'll second.
Councilmember Matthews? Was that you, Ben Vendley?
Yep.
For a second, any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Hill?
Would this be in addition to the money that the modular people would get if both of these recommendations go through?
Yes.
I would,
Yeah, with the clarification that go through because it means are adopted as law in a very similar form to what we're recommending here today, which is a pretty big caveat.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, you mean the bill, the 20 million, is that what you mean, Councilor Riley?
I think the 20 million was set up to put together four factories is what that's my recommend. That's what I recollect anyway.
No, Councilmember Flagan, what Riley's was asking is, can this housing bounty $20,000 be layered and combined with the modular housing $20,000? And I think Margaret is accurate that with the caveat that Co-Chair Hall mentioned that yes, if these are both move forward, both adopted as is through the legislature and allocated funding, et cetera.
Camera.
That's all
One
right.
would go to the jurisdiction, the other one would go to the factory operator.
Yeah, they're different payees. So the cash bounty that we're currently talking about is to incentivize local governments or to offset impacts for local governments. So while it's possible the modular money could happen, but if a modular house is built in a jurisdiction, then the jurisdiction would get a check and the factory would get a check, but those are pursuing different goals.
Okay. Councilmember Flagan.
Councilor Cody, do you feel like adding the same amendment to this recommendation as the last?
Well, this recommendation is not specific to a type of housing unit. So
it's not modular?
No, this one is as long as it's a dwelling unit and it's within annexed city limits, the local jurisdiction gets $10,000. So really, this is just a light of fire under local jurisdictions to do whatever it is they need to do to get more housing built.
I'm sorry, I was confusing the two. Got it.
That's because of our poor naming convention, so that's fine.
Okay. Any other questions for the committee or work group? Director Bell.
Yes, I know our time is winding down, so I'll be brief. I'm curious on this particular recommendation, if and what correlation there is between this particular recommendation and the infrastructure recommendation. So we're talking about money, local governments. I embrace that. I think that's great. And I think what I heard was give money. That feels like step one. And how are those two correlated?
This is designed to be something that could be implemented immediately. It's very simple to stand up. I think the ideal way to do it would be you maybe get this passed in the short session, and it would take a couple of years to stand up some of those longer term funding mechanisms. So I don't know that they necessarily have to run concurrently, but the virtue of the cash bounty is we can get a cash infusion to local jurisdictions that are helping solve the problem. And we can do it very, very quickly with very little, there's not a huge bureaucracy that we have to stand up. Does that make sense?
I think it scratches the surface, I guess, if I may, co-chair, just ask one follow-up question. To what outcomes? So we're talking about these recommendations to drive outcomes. So can you just give me a little bit of texture and detail to what outcomes?
There are jurisdictions that are hesitant to pave the way for more housing because they feel like they can't service the community that they have. And this is a recognition of everyone needs to pitch in and build more housing, but we don't, if you're going to get a local jurisdiction to do that, that can't be to the detriment of their existing residents and their existing services. So trying to have an offset to say, hey, we need you to build more housing, but we're going to try and make you whole as you're stretching your services. And other members of the committee, feel free to jump in here. This is not my most eloquent moment, but that's how I look.
Co-Chair Hall, I believe you had a comment that you were.
Oh yeah, I mean, and not being on the finance committee, I just sort of came at the framing a little bit differently. Like, large picture, our task here is ask how should the state government get into housing production in new ways. And a big topic that keeps coming up is really what is the allocation of cost for infrastructure and the kind of underlying things that open up from areas for new housing production. And it's a burden shifting, exercise. Ultimately, we're coming up with all these clever ways to do it. But right now, all these towns got built on money from the federal government for infrastructure, are implementing policies that are politically viable locally, but it's really some version of development pays for development. And that's burdened the cost of housing for the folks trying to build it. And so we're trying to figure out ways to insert the state and whatever money that can be allocated at the state. And this is the one of those ways that we actually have that, you can check the box and say, oh yeah, that could be done in the short term. So I think, broadly, it's really, another a way to do burden shifting and a way that we can do it without, a whole lot of, like Daniel said, a whole lot of propping up of large structures. So it's the shortest point from A to B is like this housing bounty. Yeah, that's how I think about it.
That's why you get to be the co-chair of the whole group, because you're way more eloquent than I am. That's what I was trying to say. So just forget what I said. Listen to him.
Okay, Councilmember Flanagan, your hand is still up. Do you have okay. Any other discussion or comments for the work group on this? I would entertain a motion for preliminary recommendation for the housing cash bounty recommendation from the Finance Committee.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Olson. And who is the second? I missed that one.
Yeah, second.
Oh, Councilmember Matthews. Thank you so much. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flanagan.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Abstain.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Abstain.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you for that. And recognizing that we are 1 minute over time, I will ask for consensus or a motion to extend the meeting for 5 minutes to get our last, or should we move this to the next one? 5 minutes? I think 5 minutes. Okay, let's do it. Last one is low interest loan fund, also from the Finance Committee. Any update or comments from the committee chair or work group chair or any other committee member? Hearing none.
No changes to.
Okay. Question from Councilmember Janney.
With this, so say you're doing a development where portions of it are designated for middle housing, how would this wouldn't be able to be applied to the construction of the development? This would be limited to the construction of the unit?
No, it would be for the development.
So even if the whole development wouldn't be under 120 AMI, they'd be able to apply for it because portions of it would be under 120 AMI?
Oh, so you're talking about, I think those are some of the details that we kind of punted on, just, and we started to try to get into that, and we kind of passed on, so we shot for a cap on the 120%, what that looks like, in a mixed development, and that, I don't, we really didn't answer that question.
I'd like to offer a friendly rider in the implementation section. Just, something that came in from some SME testimony late in the game, like last week, so it hasn't gone through the process and all this type of stuff. But there are, tax exempt bonds that are available to nonprofits separate from, from the state. And one concept that, like, getting to the same place without an actual allocation of state money would be that if the state were able to figure out a way to effectively back or guarantee private bond purchases, that it would bring down the borrowing costs, however many points. But and then, the legislature could authorize something like that without having to, allocate a certain amount of money through Ways and Means, like would be necessary for the loan fund. So that's a concept that definitely needs a lot of tire kicking analysis, all kinds of things like that. But what I'd offer is like, hey, if we can just say, part of the recommendation is for the state to look into that, and see its viability, and it might be politically expedient because it doesn't take actual state budget dollars, and it might get some developers to the same place.
And we did have some SMEs who actually had different or similar ideas. I know Jill Chin at the City of Portland got real excited about different ways she thought this could happen, and even had examples. So I think, I think that's, that's exactly what needs to happen is, to really kind of take the concept and say, all right, where does the money come from?
You're on mute, JD.
Sorry about that. Any more questions or comments for the work group? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion for preliminary approval for the low interest loan fund recommendation from the Finance Committee for work group.
I motion to move it forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Justice. Van Lee for second.
Did I get the friendly rider in there?
With the amendment, with the
With the amendment, yeah, sorry.
Yes.
No worries, no worries.
So any discussion on the motion? Okay, I'll turn over to Matt for a roll call vote on the recommendation as amended.
Councilmember Bunn.
Yes.
Councilmember Flagan.
Yes.
Councilmember Olson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mills.
Yes.
Councilmember Rajbadia.
Yes.
Councilmember Matthews.
Yes.
Councilmember Wood.
Yes.
Councilmember Rockwell.
Yes.
Councilmember Van Vliet.
Yes.
Councilmember Janney.
Yes.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes.
Councilmember Justice.
Yes.
Councilmember Cody.
Yes.
Senator Jama.
Abstain.
Director Bell.
Yes.
Director Bateman.
Yes.
Co-Chair Hall.
Yes.
Co-Chair Tuvey.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, finance team, for that great work. Last little item on the agenda. That wraps it up for third readings, by the way. Our last item on the agenda is any next steps from our illustrious staffer, Mr. Twelve.
All right. Well, thank you, HPAC members, for another marathon session. I will just be very brief because I figure everyone's tired. The next, for those keeping track, you've now adopted 44 recommendations on a preliminary basis, and there are 15 waiting in the third reading queue. Those will all be moved to the next meeting, which is on December the 8th. The only other update I'll send out is please pay attention. We're going to be sending out some probably scheduling polls, because we're going to need to get some meetings on the calendar in either probably December and potentially January, just to close out the business of the council. So on behalf of the governor and the governor's office, thank you all for all the time you're putting into this work and this process.
Thank you, everybody. Any closing words, Mr. Co-Chair?
Nope, just many thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. Good to see you. See you soon.
Take care, folks.